So after my awakening, my life was immensely transformed in pretty much every way. And I was seeing myself and others and God and the world from a higher perspective and just different than how I had been programmed to see all of those things. And I'll never forget the feeling of just liberation. There was this taste of liberation that I received after my awakening, and I was like, yeah, there's nothing to go back to. Why would I go back to living limited from these old belief systems and structures and living according to the ego and living unconsciously? Like, to me, all of that was I didn't want anything to do with it. I was so obsessed with this new state of consciousness that I was experiencing after my awakening, and just the freedom and just this, I don't know, this desire to want to learn more about things that are spiritual, like meditation and these different Eastern traditions and manifestation and all the things. I was like, wow, now that I know that I'm divine and I'm infinite and I'm one with everything and I'm one with God, one with source, and I'm learning about energy and vibration and frequency and quantum and all the things, I'm like, yeah, I can't get enough of these things. And so I spent a few years studying a lot of the Eastern traditions, really studying meditation, mystical experiences, having mystical experiences, breath work, brain waves, like so many different modalities that come with the spiritual life after someone goes through some kind of awakening. And like I said, at first it was all great. It was fun. It was so new to me and so liberating. But then it got to a point where I noticed something. And the cool thing is, when you do awaken, you do experience this expansion of consciousness and you start to pick up on patterns. So I started to pick up on some of these new patterns that were being formed in my own life post-awakening that were somewhat kind of familiar with patterns that were existing before my awakening, although they looked a little bit different. And so I was like, okay, and what this mainly was about was pertaining to the ego. It pertained to the different egoic roles and identities that I knew before my awakening. I had experienced many times these different and what I mean by different egoic roles and identities is throughout my life, what the ego was doing within me was trying to attach itself or identify itself with these certain roles. And it could have been, for me growing up, it was mostly like the things I was doing. So like the sport I was playing, or when I got into ministry, like wanting to be a pastor, like that was some kind of role, some kind of persona, some kind of identity that my ego was very much attached to and associating with. You see? So what I noticed was after my awakening that didn't really go away. If anything, it was starting to increase again, but now it was forming like this spiritual ego. And I was like, what the hell? I thought the ego was vanished. I thought it was gone. Why is it still trying to now create this new attachment to this new identity? And it's a spiritual identity. It's a spiritual person or a spiritual author or a spiritual coach. And I'm sitting there, of course, like observing all of this from awareness, witnessing it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? But that's what was happening. And there were a few times where I had some really rough days just sitting with that and accepting that, because I couldn't accept that because I was totally convinced that I transcended my ego and that's the old me and that's this and that's that. But the truth is, that's not really how this game works. That's not really how this human experience works, because even awakening, even this new spiritual thing, the spiritual identity can become another mask of the ego. And that's the truth. And so that's what I started experiencing. Now, was my awakening meaningful? Absolutely. And was it life-changing and transformative and all these things? For sure, totally. And like I said, from that awakening, I had this expansion of consciousness, which enabled me to actually sit back and observe this whole pattern of like the ego and how it continuously shows up. And it's illusory in nature, but it's tricky, and it just has a way of showing up as soon as you think you've totally transcended it. And as soon as you think that you've totally transcended it and that it will never appear again in your life or anything like that, then that's when it comes typically the strongest and with the most bark. And a lot of times, this is when it shows up in a way that it's hard to be aware of. And really, the only people that can notice it are the people that are close to you, around you. They'll call you out on it sometimes if they're good friends. So I'm starting to notice this, and I said, I can't pretend like this isn't happening anymore. I can still feel that same egoic pull or tug to this new identity, to this new role. And there's a lot of pressure anytime you have any kind of egoic role that you're trying to keep up, especially for some kind of audience or some kind of whatever. Like, it's exhausting as hell. There's a lot of pressure involved. There's a lot of striving involved. And it's funny because, you could be sitting there like this spiritual person talking about how, just let go. And it's just about, not striving, when at the same time you're striving to keep up this spiritual persona, this spiritual ego. So I'm just being honest with you guys. I'm being honest. For me, what I went through, what I'm still going through, I guess, is awareness of this. And then realizing that there's always going to be that tendency to want to attach to some kind of role or some kind of structure or some kind of identity, even after awakening. So what do you do, and how do you navigate that? That's what I'm more interested in at this point, like being honest with it, and then learning how to just navigate, I guess, life with that potential of that happening at any given point. That's what I'm interested in. And what I'm learning is that the key with this is honesty and authenticity, and actually embracing the human experience. And so what the spiritual ego thrives on is like somehow creating this separation between like the human experience and the spiritual experience. So in a very subtle way, it almost makes itself out to be something that's above being human, and it's crazy how this works, but it happens so quickly. And like I said, in a very subtle way, but the spiritual ego kicks in and it makes you feel like, because I'm awakened, I'm like better than people that haven't awakened, which isn't true at all. But that's what the spiritual ego is now trying to program into your subconscious. So what I'm learning is honesty and being real, being authentic, because when you're truly yourself, and you're letting go of things like perfectionism, which is another thing that comes back into the picture of spiritual ego, and having to look a certain way and having to like meditate for 10 hours a day or whatever, like letting go of perfectionism, embracing the imperfections of the human experience, and again, just fully being human and being more interested and focused on what that even means. To me, in my experience, that has been the greatest guide and help for me to actually move past the spiritual ego. And it just, I'm not going to say, it's caused me to totally transcend the ego, and now I never have to deal with the ego. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying now is that because of awakening, but also because of honesty and being real, being human, I feel like I have more awareness around that pattern and around that paradigm that tends to always try to sneak back into your life, even if you have awakened. Does that make sense? That's all I'm saying. So, essentially, what I've noticed with with any kind of egoic identity or role or attachment is that it has to do with living from the headspace, living from the mind, the thinking mind, the analytical mind, the mind that's dualistic, that's judging, that's comparing, all these kind of things. And so when you start to live more from your heart, which for me came with, yes, meditation, but also with just being myself and like doing a shit ton of shadow work to go within the depths of my being. That's what being honest and real is all about. It's so much of it is shadow work and learning how to embrace these parts of you that you've been rejecting or pushing away so that you could appear to be more spiritual in front of other people or in front of a crowd or an audience or a following. So that's what I mean by that. The more I would do shadow work, the more I would actually go within and be honest and real with myself, the more space, the more awareness, consciousness, light was showing up, which enabled me to be more aware of when these patterns try to slip into my consciousness and whatever. So I always go back to that quote from Carl Jung where he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So much of these different egoic roles that we cling to, even after awakening, have to do with the subconscious or the unconscious and these things that we just haven't sat with or felt or embraced or have allowed to flow through us. And they keep showing up. Like I said, same familiar pattern from before awakening, but just with a different mask. Now it's a spiritual mask. But at the root, it's really the same thing. It's the same pattern. But when you start to do shadow work, when you start to deprogram these subconscious beliefs that you received when you were a kid because of these things that may have happened in your external reality, this is when everything really starts to shift and you're just free and you feel empowered to be yourself and you're not giving a shit what anyone else thinks about you. But at the same time, you're living from this immense compassion and love and oneness and wholeness. So there's balance in your life. And that's the other thing. When there's balance, there's going to be consciousness, there's going to be a flow, there's going to be these positive qualities that are just stemming from your being when this is occurring. So yeah, it's messy. Look, shadow work and going within and sitting with these emotions and energies that have been repressed or suppressed within you for years, it's tough. I'm not going to pretend like it's this easy thing because it is what it is. And a big part of how much you're able to sit with and feel and heal and let pass through you is the realness and curiosity. That's another thing, because that's when you get into your subconscious, there's going to be things that come up, and the way you actually start to dissolve those things, those lies, those illusions, is by questioning the hell out of these things and just being a curious person and questioning all of that. So, and then the other side to all of this, and this is, I've been reading the Tao Te Ching like a lot. I'm so drawn to that book and a lot of Taoism. And so going back to balance and harmony and understanding like what's happening within your body, within your mind, within your soul, you realize, and I say this all the time, your body is not separate from the earth. It is the earth. It's one with the earth. So the more time you spend in nature, in the sun, grounding, absorbing those free electrons from the earth and being charged because you're an electrical being, the more you are going to be able to embrace what it means to be human. And I don't know what it is. But when you're connected to Mother Gaia, when you're connected to the earth, you start to flow more and you think less. And like I said earlier, that's actually a big part of moving past these egoic patterns that tend to come back up even after your spiritual awakening. A big part of this is starting to shift your lifestyle, shift your way of being from living predominantly in your headspace and your analytical thinking, busy mind to your heart space. And when your brain waves slow down from like high beta into alpha, which is what pretty much happens when you're connected to the earth, grounding, plugged into the Schumann resonance, the frequency of the earth, it literally slows down your brain waves and you feel more centered, you feel more grounded, and you feel just more free to be yourself. And there's this childlike energy that just starts to arise. And you remember what it's like to just be a kid and be free and be authentic and not care about what people are thinking about you or judging you for. Like all these things they just dissolve. And the human experience becomes a very profound experience that you learn to fall in love with. And something else I'm learning is the more I get into this, the more I see that we come here, we incarnate to fall in love with this experience, to transcend the judgment. As long as we're still judging, we're attracting whatever it is we're judging. And that's creating these different egoic constructs. And so that's that world, that's that level of consciousness. But when you start to melt into the reality of unconditional love and oneness and wholeness, all of a sudden you see clearly, because now you're operating from this higher consciousness, from your higher self, and you see that the whole reason you're here is to fall in love with life. Life, yeah. I talked about this recently somewhere. I think I wrote it. I was talking about how our cells literally create or emit light that is stronger than the sun. And so the question is, well, if that's true, then why aren't we walking around blinding each other? And the answer is because our bodies use that light for our life force energy. So your life is light. Your life, you are the light of the world, literally. And life, and why we're here in the human experience, is about falling in love with life. And that starts with you loving yourself. That is the most powerful thing that you can do. Choose yourself, accept yourself, love yourself, be real, be human. This is a temporary human experience. Forget being perfect. That's boring. Perfection is boring, and it's not reality. It's just this self-generated illusion that keeps us exhausted and worn out and frustrated. And it's very egoic. It's not reality. It's not truth. So I don't know. Sit with this. If it resonates, great. If not, oh well, go to the next video. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.